and on a city budget, and cities are not allowed to run deficits. Obviously, that is a significant challenge. This has primarily been driven because of revenue loss from transit and recreation rentals. With transit, we can't charge fares right now to protect the safety of our transit operators. We have rear boarding, and we've had to remove the fare box. We've already had 5 members of Brampton Transit test positive, and we're certainly not going to risk their safety over that fare box. But it does put municipalities' finances in a precarious position. I also want to note that today is Earth Day. Last week, I shared with residents of Brampton that we started a backyard garden initiative. It's great for food security, it's great for the environment, and Brampton is proud to be a green city. Since that time, I would note that almost 6,000 residents have signed up for our backyard garden program, where we're providing low-income families and seniors with free supplies to build their own backyard garden. So it's beautiful to see how many Brampton residents have taken this up, and I just thought that's important to highlight on Earth Day. Since Brampton announced the first citywide garden program, I can tell you whether it's greenhouses or people like Frank Ferragini, Frankie Flowers, as you know, have stepped up to look at ways to help, and it's just been so encouraging. And we're grateful for the support of these organizations. Each week, I like to give a bylaw update, and I want to thank our bylaw and enforcement team who are doing a tremendous job under difficult conditions. When this began, we beefed up our bylaw department with 10 new bylaw officers, and they continue to protect the safety of the public. And I want to mention a few notable cases from the last week. There was complaints that were coming in about an illegal cannabis dispensary that was operating, that was busy, and causing a potential risk of the spread of the COVID-19 virus. On Tuesday, April 22nd, the investigation culminated in a search warrant being executed by the Peel Regional Police under the Cannabis Control Act. During the investigation, bylaw enforcement officers charged 4 individuals under our Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act for failing to comply with the provincial order. Each individual was issued a ticket for $880. Over the last week, we've received over 375 complaints. There's been 4,728 proactive investigations. And so our bylaw officers are working 24/7, making sure that the advice of public health is being followed. We've seen 111 warnings issued and 30 new charges. So we take this very seriously, and some examples of the last week of the type of activity we've seen that have resulted in charges. People continuing to use the dog park. We had individuals who were painting in a park that was closed, and people continuing to use park equipment. There's also an incident where someone was selling produce from their vehicle in a parking lot, not once, but 3 times in 2 days, and now they're going to have to attend court to face charges for that. We cannot ignore the advice of public health, and our bylaw officers will make sure those that are risking the safety of the rest of the community will face stiff financial penalties. Today, there's 2 initiatives that I'd like to announce. First of all, we have the Mayor's Working Group on resuming city services and reopening facilities. And let me preface that by saying that this working group is to look at what that new normal could be. In terms of what the date will be, that will be driven by what public health says. Certainly we trust science, we trust the advice of public health, but that conversation needs to start in terms of what is our city going to look like if there is a relaxing in June or July of some of these provisions? Are we going to have gloves or additional sanitary material provided at city facilities? And I'm grateful that this conversation is going to be started by Regional Councillor Martin Medeiros. He's going to be the councillor that takes the lead on this in partnership with the Brampton Emergency Management Office, Peel Public Health, and other partners and other stakeholders. The working group will focus on reopening city facilities in a safe and measured way, but once again, not until public health deems that it's appropriate. These details and advice will be shared with myself and my council colleagues at a future date, but the work is going to begin now of looking at how this can be done responsibly. The next initiative is our bike lane project. Right now our roads are empty, but our trails are crowded. And we want to make sure that we can follow the advice of physical distancing by allowing those that want to go out for a bike ride or go on a city trail can do so in a safe and responsible manner. Regional Councillor Gurpreet Dillon will share a few words on the interim bike lanes, followed by Councillor Santos and David Liang. And I have to say, I'm personally really excited about these bike lines. I just took my bike out a few days ago, and I rode the route, and it's beautiful to see a safe way in which people can get exercise, go get their groceries, and I'm glad the City of Brampton is being a leader on active transportation in Canada. And I think you're going to see other cities follow this example, because cities are for people, and having an expanded bike network is an example of that. The last thing I'm going to say before we ask Councillor Medeiros to come up is we have tonight's tele-town hall at 6:30. Any resident of Brampton can participate and ask questions of our hospital CEO and public health. We do this every week in Brampton. You're welcome to participate. Details are at brampton.ca. And I also want to say thank you to Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and Premier Doug Ford. They've been in regular contact with issues we've had. I know just recently I flagged concerns about our long-term care facilities, which I believe are understaffed and really struggling right now. I've raised those concerns directly with the Premier, and I appreciate the fact that senior levels of government are hands-on, and we're hopeful that by working together, we're going to get through these difficult challenges. So on that note, I'm going to ask Councillor Martin Medeiros to say a few words about the new working group that he'll be leading on behalf of the City of Brampton.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Certainly, I'd like to reiterate that there are no timelines. We will follow strictly the guidelines of public health, of our medical officer for the region appeal, and certainly our provincial and federal public health experts and medical experts. I think right now there are people who are itching to get back into using our facilities. I know there are user groups who want to get back and think that it's safe to go play golf or go play tennis. Certainly, I think that it's an opportunity for us to look at how we're going to provide some of these services when we get the okay to reopen. And I'll be working with my councillor colleagues on their respective task forces in terms of how do we unwind some of these task forces, ensuring that there's going to be a proper place for some of the services and supports that we currently provide, and what that looks like in the new world. I know with external stakeholders, business groups, our BIA, our Brampton Board of Trade, I know that we'll have to work with them in terms of looking at some of the pedestrian traffic and what that all looks like. And I think I just want to be very clear that right now, everything that we do will be to ensure public safety and the residents of Brampton's public health are protected. And we'll also have to look at what that means in terms of if a second wave does come, in terms of how do we roll back some of those services. I think also, just lastly, we'll look at leveraging some of this opportunity and saying what type of key investments could we make now. We talk about improving customer service. So all our services that we do provide as a city, are they all online? Are they easy accessible? So we might look at identifying some key investments that the council might want to decide in terms of making them now that might help us going to the future. But again, these will be recommendations to the mayor that will then be approved by council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Medeiros. And Councillor Medeiros is an asset for the City of Brampton with his previous work as a bureaucrat with the province of Ontario and as an advisor at the European Union. His skill set will be helpful on this working group. Next up, Councillor Gurpreet Dillon, who will speak to our active transportation network.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Medeiros, for those updates. So the City of Brampton is excited to announce that we're implementing interim bike lanes to promote safe, active transportation opportunities during the COVID-19 pandemic. To help protect the safety, health and safety of residents during the pandemic, on Saturday, the City of Brampton implemented the interim bike lanes along the Bodden Street corridor. These interim bike lanes will provide an alternative cycling option to recreation trails for residents and allow cyclists to maintain physical distancing. So as of the 18th of April, the city's temporarily closed off curb lanes to vehicular traffic along the following sections of road, which are Bawden Street, between Ken Willens Drive to Howden Boulevard, and on Howden Boulevard between Bawden to Central Park. These sections of road are part of the planned east-west cycling corridor connection as proposed in our active transportation master plan. As well, the city's working to implement permanent protected bike lanes on these streets in line with our 2040 vision. And when we speak of vehicular traffic in Peel region, it's down 33% as of the beginning of COVID-19. So this gives us a unique opportunity to showcase a part of our east-west cycling corridor. So we're also really excited to share the new maps here today that will be online that show just how active transportation can connect you to important resources during the COVID-19 pandemic, like grocery stores, pharmacies, and healthcare facilities as well. So we're encouraging everybody to visit brampton.ca/cycling, where you can see a series of bike loops and a GIS map that allows you to add layers and connect resources, connect to resources you need, whether it's youth support, mental health organizations, and the COVID-19 Assessment Center. So I'm now going to ask Mr. Mayor to come along, and also my colleague, Rowena Santos, who's been the lead counselor on active transportation.
And I was just going to recognize Councillor Santos is the council representative on active transportation on the Cycling Advisory Committee, and you'll see starting today these maps up in the city of Brampton for where you can bicycle safely with physical distancing. And I want to thank Councillor Dillon and Councillor Santos for their hard work on this. I think this is something Brampton can be proud of. So Councillor Santos, tell us about your great work.
Thanks so much, Mayor and Councillor Dillon. In this COVID-19 emergency, we've all had to acknowledge everything that we've taken for granted, including our walks along recreational trails, taking the bus to school, or even for daily essentials, and also our daily commute by car to work. Even the way we move around the city, as you know, has changed. Coincidentally, these changes support Brampton's vision to promote active transportation. My son Lennon and I, we ride and run the trails very often in the city, and I knew that in this emergency, we would not necessarily be able to practice proper physical distancing, especially with warmer weather around the corner. Within 2 weeks of the shutdown, we got together with our cycling community, and we started talking about the challenges that we face with COVID-19 and moving people around to get to access to essential services. We also talked about and highlighted the benefits of promoting exercise outside during this time, because we didn't want to sacrifice that or shut down our trails. And finally, we looked at ways to implement active transportation maybe ahead of time, given the reduction in car traffic. Brampton is supporting all of our physical distancing protocols by putting these dedicated bike lanes and routes in place as described on all of these maps. Let's respect and make sure that our pedestrians and our cyclists are safe. When we launched the temporary bike lanes this past weekend, a sign was posted that we in Brampton are building streets for people. The result of our collective action is a step to support a culture shift in Brampton that is more inclusive and focuses on the safe and healthy movement of people, not just cars. This is all part of Brampton's 2040 vision, and the stark reality is that things will never be the same after this. COVID-19 has presented opportunities just like this one to transcend the status quo and emerge as a more compassionate, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient Brampton when we overcome this. I'm now going to call on David Lang from Bike Brampton to join us and say a few words as well.
Thank you, Councillor Santos. Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor mentioned, today is the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day celebration. It is therefore fitting that while COVID-19 pandemic continues to be a crisis felt around the world, it is also today providing a catalyst for what may be lasting and positive change that may well help us avert the worst effects of a climate catastrophe, the likes of which would make COVID-19 pale by comparison. The interim bike lanes provided a long-awaited and much-needed safer cycling corridor for those needing to travel east-west through the city center. The maps combine with this spine to create an active transportation network along less busy routes that will connect people and places where they work, buy groceries, buy medications, and avail themselves of other essential products and services. This past Monday, I saw a cyclist on the bike lane riding on Vauden, west of Centre Street. It was interesting that as soon as he got to the end of the bike lane at Kinwillans, he immediately reverted to riding on the sidewalk, which is both illegal and makes it impossible for him to practice safe social distancing with other cyclists and pedestrians. So I want to thank city staff, especially those in transportation planning and traffic engineering, for being able to move heaven and earth to get these maps done quickly and the bike lanes installed efficiently. I've learned that there is much more to this process than painting a few signs and dropping a few construction barrels onto the road. In this time of hardship and social isolation, when we are frightened for our own health and that of our loved ones, and when so many of us are without a paycheck, I want to thank Mayor Brown, Councillor Santos, and the rest of Council for providing a decisive leadership, for being empathetic to our situation, for recognizing how important it is for us to be able to be outside for exercise and recreation, and for recognizing the need to provide more public space to allow for proper physical distancing for walkers and cyclists, and for recognizing the need to provide us with transportation options that will both save us money and increase our chances of staying healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and that summarizes this week's updates. And at this point, I'd be happy to take questions. I would note that Brampton is a mosaic of the world, and one of the benefits today is that we have a councillor who is fluent in Portuguese and French. We have a councillor who is fluent in Punjabi and one in Tagalog, and we're happy to answer any questions you have in those multiple languages as well. So looking at our list of questions, I see Noor from the Toronto Star first.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Thanks so much. And I just wanted to ask, so one of the reasons that other municipalities kind of haven't taken this step is because they're concerned that this is going to bring out more people. It's going to defeat the purpose of physical distancing. A, have you guys seen that? I know it's only been a few days, but maybe if anyone who's out there, have you seen that? And B, what do you think about that excuse, in a way, to not do what you guys have done?
I think people always put up obstacles for active transportation. There's always been a lot of detractors to active transportation, but I think in the long term, every city that is invested in active transportation treasures that investment that they made. In terms of physical distancing, the choice is cyclists are still going to cycle, and do you want walkers, joggers, and cyclists on the same paths that are open, because we have cities still keep their paths open, or do you want to separate them? The fact that we have roads that have never been emptier, there's no better time to open up some space for people, and so I would note the way that our bike lanes have been set up allows for physical distancing. There's signs pointing out how physical distancing should be abided by, and so we have confidence that it will be followed accordingly. And my own view, what I noticed when I went out was that because we now have two areas that people can walk or bicycle, it was less crowded.
Is it easy? I haven't been out there, so I don't know. But is it something which you're finding that the cars are, the drivers out there, are they understanding, or are they all surprised? In terms of what they're seeing.
Well, let me say the starting point: cities are for people, not for cars. And having said that, I haven't had very many complaints. Frankly, the roads are empty right now. And if you're not gonna do active transportation right now, and the roads are empty, then you're never going to do it. And so we have an ambitious plan that was ratified by Council on May 29th of 2019, and we just took the initiative to set up some of these interim routes that had already been approved on the basis that this would help with physical distancing, and the fact the roads were more empty than they've ever been.
Okay, I have two more quick questions. Should I continue,
yes,
or does
please.
someone else want to go?
Please continue.
Okay. One is just, so this is an interim. Do you have any idea how long you're going to continue this until the measures are in place or beyond, or have you thought about that yet?
So right now, the goal is to maintain these routes for as long as that we're in this pandemic scenario where physical distancing is important, where people are being given this guidance from public health that we need to stay at home and only be out on trails or in our backyards. I would say, though, Council has adopted a report, The Big Ask, of how Brampton could really embrace active transportation. And so right now, this is an interim measure, but I think within the life of this Council, you're going to see Brampton make record investments in active transportation because we believe in it.
Okay. And lastly, are you guys thinking of expanding it at all? Like cutting down any other roads?
We've had two.
This goes well?
Yeah, so we've had two councillors, Councillor in the northwest of the city and Councillor Dillon in the east end of the city who've asked about that in their wards. And so I would say we're very much open to expanding this, and that's a conversation I'm going to be having with various councillors. I would love to see this expanded.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up on our list is Graham from the Brampton Guardian.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good.
Oh, hello. How's it going, guys? Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to sort of Nora there sort of just stole my thunder a little bit, but I just wanted to. I'm wondering the bike lanes. Is there some sort of signage or line painting that's been done to sort of mark these new trails on the roads?
So there is signage, and we've got cones set up, the cylinder cones to clearly distinguish what is road and what is for cyclists. And for those that have been out on the route, they tell me that never have they felt safer cycling in the city. And I have to tell you, as someone who has biked in Brampton, before, sometimes if you're on the road, a car will beep at you. If you're on a sidewalk, pedestrians will be upset that you're on the sidewalk. Really, bikers have been given no safe place, and we've created a safe place now for cyclists.
Okay. I also wanted to ask about, you had mentioned there sort of as we move towards reopening, you mentioned June or July. You didn't say May, so I'm just curious, is that sort of, could it happen before that if health, public health decides that it's getting safer in the next couple of weeks, or is that sort of a lofty goal and we're looking closer to June and July?
So we shut down city events until July 2nd, and that was on the advice of public health. In terms of whether it could happen earlier, obviously, if we flatten the curve and public health gives us advice, I think we'd adapt. But I just want to stress it will be driven from the advice of public health. And I think being honest and transparent with the public is always critical. I know it would be nice to say, listen, things are going to be back to normal in a few weeks. We're on the cusp of May, but in all honesty, I would be shocked if things change that dramatically. I would say, given what I'm being told and seeing, June it would be the best case scenario for some of these provisions being relaxed. But I've got great confidence in Councillor Medeiros to take the appropriate provisions to be ready whenever that comes. Next, Graham, do you have another question? Or our next one is then Lucy from in Brampton.
Hi there. So I know you spoke a little bit about the dates of reopening the economy, but does the City of Brampton have a specific reopening plan for when it's safe to do so?
So I'm going to ask Councillor Medeiros, who's chairing this effort, to speak to the process that he's going to embark upon with the input of public health and the Brampton Emergency Office.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Lucy, for the question. Again, there are no set dates, and obviously in consultation with our CAO, Dave Barrick, and senior management team, we'll look at the different services and different aspects of the city in which that we could open in a staged, phased approach based again on recommendations from our public health and medical officer. So what does that entail? That entails, for example, our sports fields. I imagine we've had cases where we've had soccer teams jump over the fence to go play soccer, and I'm sure once there's news in the media in terms of guidelines possibly being restricted, we're going to see how do we control that? Is that something that we can allow for user groups to use our facilities in that way? What precautions do we have? Do we let people into our recreational facilities? They're going to want to be using our gyms. So those are a lot of those questions and sort of considerations. Our public transit, how people take public transit, and I know they're looking at it. So essentially what our plan is going to entail is just looking across the board on everything that we're doing, connecting with also the task forces that my colleagues are leading, because when we sort of go back into somewhat normalcy, which we recognize from everything we hear, there won't be anything normal about it, is in terms of what does that mean? So these task forces, their supports have been provided, there's a sort of infrastructure that's been built, and how do we pass that over into our sort of regular business? But everything's going to be sort of in consultation, and we might make a decision that, because we also have to look at other municipalities, Mississauga, Town of Caledon, on how they're sort of running their, how they're reopening and ensuring that we're all on the same page and coordinating activity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. And next up is Nida from The Pointer.
City staff put together a report outlining the... Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So city staff put together a report outlining the financial impact COVID-19 is going to have on Brampton. Are you at all concerned that the report does not address the full impact of COVID-19?
So we're in a very fluid situation. This report gives best estimates on where we are based on how long this could last from July to January. But I think in everything we've seen, it's a fluid scenario. And I would also note what we don't have in terms of the impact on the city's treasury is the type of assistance we may be getting. And so right now we're looking at it affecting the city's finances in the range of 44 to 55 million. But I would note that I've had encouraging conversations with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland that there's going to be some operational help for Canada's big cities this year. Very encouraged with her tone and the conversation that I've had with her, and also with the Premier and the Minister of Finance, who have said to keep track of all our expenses of where there's been costs because of COVID-19. They understand that municipalities can't run deficits. And so I would say I am concerned right now, but we have reason for optimism that there's going to be some help coming to municipalities.
Okay. And can you please explain from an organizational and strategical point of view if the city has set up a command team to specifically deal with the city's finances?
So we do have a command team with the CEO and the city's treasurer, and they've been working on this report for the last month, a number of weeks, and we have confidence in the team at the city of Brampton. I see next up on our list is Don McLeod from Brampton Focus.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. As of today, 73% of the deaths of residents in regard to COVID-19 have taken place in long-term care facilities and retirement homes. Michelle contacted Brampton Focus, and both her parents are at Holland Christian Homes, and they have tested positive for COVID-19. He also mentioned that 49 of the 120 residents have tested positive, and 17 of 36 staff as well. She wanted to know, what is the city doing to mobilize support and PPE, and is the city's seniors task force working on this issue of coordinated support?
So the city's seniors task force is focused on medication pickups and grocery pickups for seniors that are living in their own homes. When you get to long-term care, that's a bit of a different dynamic. I would note I'm well aware of the situation at Holland Christian Homes, and obviously I'm concerned by it. I've been in conversations over the last number of weeks with the Premier about this, with the Minister of Long-Term Care, Marilee Fullerton, who I speak to almost every few days. It's something that we've talked about daily on our regional call. And I would note that we have a good line of sight into the homes that are publicly owned, the ones that are privately owned, Public Health does their own assessments. Dr. Lawrence Lowe is regularly doing assessments, but I would stress any home that lacks PPE can get it from the ministry. They have made that clear. If they ask for help, if they ask for PPE, they have an emergency supply that can be provided. I'm confident, based on the availability and current supplies of PPE, that challenge can be met for any home that asks for it. My concern right now is staffing. And what alarms me, and even this morning I was speaking to the government of Ontario about it, is that we're short PSWs, we're short staff. And the battle right now is in long-term care facilities. And it hits home for me. It hits home for me. I have a grandmother who's 105 in a long-term care facility, and I find the entire situation horrifying, that people that we love, we want to be able to help. And right now they're reliant on the healthcare workers that can get in. What I'm hoping to see, and I think the province is considering this, is right now we have surplus healthcare workers in the province. There are parts of the province where there is very limited COVID exposure. You look at areas like Barrie, where I think there's 1 or 2 cases, or Kingston, where there's no cases. You've had hospitals ramp up. You've got experienced medical staff that are available to help, and they can be redeployed to help out these long-term care facilities that are under siege. In Quebec, they brought in the Canadian Forces to help out, who have their own medical units, and I think we're going to need to see that redeployment in our long-term care homes in Ontario. Michelle Emmanuel at Trillium has had hospital staff that she can spare go out and help in some of these red zones. They call a long-term care center that's in a full outbreak a red zone, and we need to see more of that. We need to see healthcare workers help out in long-term care homes, because they don't right now have the staffing available. They've lost staff, whether it's through self-isolation or simply not being able to hire people or get people to come into the home right now.
Great. I'm sure Michelle will be happy to hear that. The next question is in regards to your financial crisis. You mentioned Vancouver as the first one to come out, lay off 2,000 city staff, and other mayors are falling in line. Obviously, you're in touch with them. You mentioned the losses of $44 to $55 million in the revenue of the city, and that was regarding transit and recreational charges. I think in 2018, the city received about $13 million in gas tax money, which obviously is not going to be close to that this year. Is that something that you have addressed with the province? And is there a possibility, because interest rates are so low, that the federal government would entertain municipalities taking on debt in the future?
So it wouldn't be the federal government that would make that decision. It would be the provincial government that would decide whether municipalities can run deficits. That's not... asking for the ability to borrow is not, I think, a sustainable solution for municipalities. I would note yesterday I had a meeting with the Greater Toronto Area mayors over WebEx that Mayor Tory hosted, and one of the topics we discussed was about the gas tax and the need for that funding to be expanded and not diminished, given that revenue may be down. And so I'm encouraged by the comments I've been getting from the provincial and federal governments that there's a possibility that transfer will be expanded this year, and you certainly wouldn't see a decrease. Next question I see, my pool from Y Media.
Good morning, Mayor. So most of my questions have already been answered. Where does Brampton stand where it comes in terms of flattening the curve, sir?
So I'm going to start by answering that question. I'm going to ask Gurpreet Dillon to expand on it as well. What I would say is that the measures that Bramptonians are taking are working. The physical distancing, I'm being told by the health officials, by Dr. Lowe and by Dr. Naveed Mohammed at Brampton Civic, they are working. And we've seen a spike in numbers over the last week, but that's partly due to the fact that we've increased testing. The province has increased testing. And so you've seen a number of positive IDs come back from some of the long-term care and essential worker testing that they've embarked upon. But overall, the words that I've heard from public health is they are encouraged, and we are on the path to flatten the curve. We're not there yet, but we're on that path. But if you listen to health experts, they would not feel confident in that until you've seen 14 days of a decline, and we're still seeing increases. So we're not in that period yet of seeing declines, and so we are still a long way away from actually flattening the curve, and Councillor Dillon can expand upon this.
ਸੋ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਮੇਅਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕੀਤਾ, ਆਪਾਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਇੰਪਰੂਵਮੈਂਟਸ ਆਪਾਂ ਵੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਅਜੇ ਤੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ, ਪਰ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਗਾਈਡਲਾਈਨਸ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਜਿੰਨੀ ਕੁ ਸਲਾਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਲੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੀਲ ਹੈਲਥ ਤੋਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਇੰਪਰੂਵਮੈਂਟਸ ਆਪਾਂ ਵੇਖਾਂਗੇ। ਸੋ ਅਜੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਲੱਗਣਾ, ਅਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ, ਪਰ ਟਾਈਮ ਸਿਰ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੋਸ਼ਲ ਡਿਸਟੈਂਸਿੰਗ, ਫਿਜ਼ੀਕਲ ਡਿਸਟੈਂਸਿੰਗ ਆਪਾਂ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ, ਉਨੀ ਛੇਤੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚਾਂਗੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਮਤਲਬ ਇਨ ਟਰਮਸ ਆਫ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਿਜ਼ਲਟਸ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਕਰੇਜ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੈਲਥ ਅਫੀਸ਼ੀਅਲਸ ਇਨਕਰੇਜ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟਲੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਜੀ।
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. And Michael, was there a follow-up question?
No, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Tabish from Red FM Radio.
Most of my questions have been answered, but I would like to know that last week you wrote a letter to the provincial government regarding adding the transit operators in COVID-19 testing priority list. So have you heard back from the province in this regard, or any update on it?
So they told me that they're considering it, and I expect in the near future we're going to see transit operators being given access to testing. It hasn't happened yet, but the response was encouraging, and I would note that the president of ATU Canada has also joined this campaign and been asking the government to ensure this. And so the president of ATU Canada visited, that's the Amalgamated Transit Union, visited the city of Brampton. And so I can tell you they're grateful that this campaign has been initiated in Brampton, and we're going to continue to push it until these essential workers are being given the testing that they deserve. The fact we've had five transit operators test positive is alarming, given the integral role they're playing to support Canada's food sector and medical laboratories.
And Mr. Brown, 2 meters physical distancing rule is in place, and most of the grocery stores, they are following them correctly, like proper spots are fixed in the line to the cashier. But within the stores, it is seen that people are not maintaining that distancing, like during shopping from the aisles and something. So do you consider to start some sort of safety or security patrolling inside the stores, or asking the store employees to keep guiding the customers to maintain the physical distance?
So our bylaw team has been in regular contact with some of these grocery stores. We're grateful for the service that they're providing, grateful that we've been able to maintain the supply chain. There's been some instances where bylaws needed to speak to some of these operators and remind them of how they should be governing themselves and how they can ensure physical distancing in their stores. I think the first week or two was challenging because people did not understand and why it was so critical to adapt to this new reality. But the longer we go on, the more we're seeing all grocery stores adapt, and there has been a good level of collaboration with Bylaw and the grocery stores on respecting the new rules. Okay, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being part of our weekly update.